Hi, it's Mitch from PickDogs.com here with Chris and Ron. We are ready for week 5 of the college football season. Hard to believe that the season is almost half over already. We're already at least a third over for a lot of teams, and we'll be close to half over after this week. Got a few matchups that are going to maybe mix things up among the top 25 as we move further into conference play. But you can see, normally there's not an undefeated team left when all is said and done. Chris, what do you think of this week's slate?
Yeah, it's a great slate. We're going to start to see some of the matchups in the top 10 kind of shake down. We've got a great top 5 matchup that we're going to be talking about as well. And a lot of teams that could be on upset alert this week. So I'm ready to break the card down with you guys and ready to make some money.
Yeah, there's some great conference matchups, some ranked matchups, and also UMass is playing Miami, Ohio. Miami, Ohio is an 18-point favorite. Doesn't get better than that. Can't wait for that game.
Well, it should be a monster week, and let's just get started. We start off on weekday college football action as Virginia Tech heads to Miami. Traditionally a pretty tough battle, but this year Virginia Tech not looking like all that much, and Miami looking like a runaway train. A lot of times, though, what looks on the surface isn't always what happens out on the field. Chris?
Yeah, I kind of just sit here, waiting for the other shoe to drop with Miami. It just feels like, there's maybe that one game where maybe they stumble, but right now it's not looking like it's coming. I don't think it's coming here. Virginia Tech, for me, just way too inconsistent offensively. Kyron Drones just has not been able to make those big throws. And the Virginia Tech defense has not been able to stop the run outside the top 100 in rush defense this season. The Miami offense averaging over 6 yards per carry. I think this is another game where Miami runs wild. I'm going to go with Miami. They did win this one by at least 3 touchdowns.
I like the under in this game. I think both teams going to look to run the ball quite often. And, Virginia Tech may not have the best rush defense on paper, but a lot of their opponents have ran the ball, 40 plus times. So their yards per carry hasn't been terrible, and I think it continues to improve after a strong week last week. Virginia Tech's offense, like Chris mentioned, the passing game just hasn't really been there. Miami's defense has been elite. So I think we see a low-scoring game. I like the under.
On paper, Miami just dominates this one on both sides of the ball. The only edge that Virginia Tech might have here is on the special teams, a little bit of Beamer ball left over, but I don't see it happening. I was a little less optimistic about my Canes covering the spread last week against South Florida, but they went in there and just absolutely busted them up something fierce. I think this one could be something ugly as well. One thing to keep in mind, could have some weather for this game as a major hurricane on its way to the Florida area. Don't think we're going to have a hit in Miami or in Miami Gardens where the stadium is, but I do believe those outer bands could have some effect on this game. Next up, we head to SEC action in Oxford, Mississippi, as Ole Miss is taking on Kentucky. This is going to be a good one. Of course, Kentucky has been tested already this season. That war that they had with Georgia, but that one was in Lexington. And Ole Miss, no one's really gotten even a whiff of these guys yet. Ron, what are you thinking for this one?
Yeah, these teams have been great against the spread this season. Ole Miss 4-0 and Kentucky's 3-1 against the number. But you mentioned Kentucky, that game against Georgia was at home, and Kentucky's played all 4 of its first 4 games at home. This is their first road game. I am a little bit worried about it. That defense was excellent in that game against the Bulldogs, but the offense didn't do much of anything. And against Ole Miss, if you're down early, you could be in trouble because this offense can put up points early, late, and very often. They've ran the ball very, very well. The offensive line's been one of the best in college football. And, we know about Lane Kiffin teams being offensive juggernauts, but this defense has been excellent as well. One of the best run defenses in college football. So for me, I just think the Rebels, while I don't love backing 4-0 against the spread teams because usually you don't find a lot of value on them, I think the Rebels are too much in this one.
Yeah, for me, Middle Tennessee, Wake Forest, and Georgia Southern does very little to inspire me, especially when the other team has played South Carolina, Georgia, and Ohio in recent weeks. 3 much, much better teams. And, the thing is, when we look at Kentucky's overall defensive numbers, they are 6th best in the nation, allowing just 217 yards a game against that way bigger competition. Ole Miss, number 1 in yards per game, 670.8. That is obscene. That's 2 games for most teams. 248 yards per game on the ground, but Kentucky giving up only 74.8 yards per game on the ground. I think this game's going to be a little closer than people think. Give me the 2 touchdowns and a field goal in the Cats.
Yeah, I got to go with Ole Miss here. It's just about, Ole Miss is going to be the toughest offense that Kentucky's played. Kentucky can be probably the toughest defense that Ole Miss has gone up against for sure. But I still just go back to what Ron said. It's the first road game for Kentucky here. Ole Miss, just when they score and you have a 3 and out or two, it tends to bury you, behind the 8 ball early. And I just think that Ole Miss is going to be too much here. I like them to win this one by at least 28. So I'm taking Ole Miss in a landslide.
Next up, we head to the Big House where the Michigan Wolverines play a 5th consecutive home game this season up against Minnesota for the Little Brown Jug. Of course, in these rivalry trophy games, you leave the record books at the window. And I'll tell you what, you have these two teams, you can leave the offenses at the window too, because both these offenses are uninspiring while both defenses have pretty much been superlative this season. PJ Fleck plays a conservative game, a game that really exhausts the clock, while Michigan has gone to the ground game. And really, the quarterback play has been suspect, and you can see that by the musical chairs that's been there. The thing is that the line in this one has been dropping in this one, and I can see why, because it was at 10. I don't even think there's going to be 10 points scored in this game. So in that case, I'm going to have to take the Minnesota Golden Gophers, and it's kind of like the song says, ha, 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 you and me, Little Brown Jug, I love thee. Chris?
I almost started dancing behind the scenes there. I'm gonna take the Golden Gophers and the points as well. I just don't know if I can trust Michigan to win this one by double digits. We saw Alex Orji take over the starting gig last time. 7 of 12 passing for 32 yards. Yeah, so it's going to be a run-heavy game, and when it's a run-heavy game and a lot of clock chewed up, this might end up looking like a Service Academy game. I'm going to go with the points with the Golden Gophers here. Just a lot of mucking around between the 20s.
This is a tough one because it's a letdown spot for Michigan. They were down and looked like they had no chance against USC because they couldn't throw the football in that game. They needed to get a touchdown to take the lead, but they had a big run. They ran the ball really well in that game. And for me, while it's a letdown and it's a 5th straight home game, I still like Michigan because this is the first road game of the season for Minnesota. Their offense has been equally as inept. And when you look at that Minnesota run defense last week against Iowa, giving up 270 rushing yards and 6 yards a carry, if Michigan's able to get the ground game going early, they might be able to put up enough points to win this game and cover the spread. So in an ugly matchup, I think Michigan prevails and covers the number.
Next up, we head to the Little Apple, Manhattan, where the Kansas State Wildcats return home after a beatdown loss at the hands of the BYU Cougars and face an Oklahoma State team that, were beaten down themselves in Stillwater at home in their last game. They dressed up the score at the end, but there was a good portion of that game where Utah just lost all respect for the Oklahoma State offense. I don't know, Chris, who bounces back in this one?
I think I'm more likely to back Kansas State to bounce back in Manhattan just because I trust their offense to be able to get going. Oklahoma State's defense is still problematic. 126th in total defense nationally, 101st in yards per play, 103rd against the rush. And this is still a Kansas State offense that's just outside the top 15 in rushing offense per game and just outside the top 5 in yards per carry. I think that Kansas State's defense shows up here and, the only time we've seen Oklahoma State on the road was that blowout win over Tulsa. Doesn't leave a whole lot for me to be excited about with Oklahoma State's prospects here. I'm going to go with Kansas State to win this one by a touchdown.
Yeah, give me Kansas State as well. I think Oklahoma State is one of the weaker defenses in the Big 12. And when you're giving up 350 yards to Tulsa, I think you have really big problems going forward. On the road now, against a Kansas State team that it was an ugly game against BYU, but they still ran the ball very, very well. Their run defense is one of the best in the country. I think Kansas State has a better chance of bouncing back, so give me the Wildcats.
Yeah, I like Kansas State's chances of bouncing back here too. I just think that the Oklahoma State defense and rushing attack have been really that bad. I think one of the more disappointing things this season has been this Oklahoma State rushing attack, which just has not gotten it going, ranked in 110 plus in rushing per game. And meanwhile, I don't think that the Kansas State passing attack is going to invoke fear into anybody anytime soon. I do know that they can rush the football. I just think Avery Johnson is a good runner of the football, but his passing skills, like I mentioned on last week's show, certainly lacking in that, 2 interception, no touchdown performance last week at BYU pretty much proved that out. Next up, we go to South Bend, where the Fighting Irish and Notre Dame get a stiff test in the Louisville Cardinal. And the Louisville Cardinal get a stiff test in the Fighting Irish and Notre Dame. This is that part of the schedule that Notre Dame reserves for the ACC teams. They do this because of their membership in the ACC basketball. So they play, I believe it's 4 or 5 ACC football games a year. And this year they draw Louisville. Ron, what do you think?
Yeah, last week I was on Louisville as a premium play, and I got to say, while they won and covered, I got a little bit fortunate in that one because Georgia Tech outgained them by about 80 yards and had more first downs in that one. I am a little bit worried about Louisville in this game. This is their first road game. We've mentioned that a few times on the show, but the first real test, in my opinion, for the Cardinals. Their offense wasn't great in that game against Georgia Tech. They didn't run the ball too well, and I just think Notre Dame is better on both sides of the ball. Must-win game for Notre Dame, as it is for Louisville, but I just think Notre Dame's too much in this game. We're actually getting a pretty good price with the Irish because of their loss earlier to Northern Illinois, and because last week they didn't cover against Miami, Ohio. But give me the Irish in this one, laying less than a touchdown.
I'm going to take Louisville in this one plus the points in a game that I think is decided by 3 points or less, one way or the other. The Louisville defense has been remarkable this season. As good as the offense has been, the defense ranked 26th in the nation, allowing less than 269 yards per game. Against the pass, they've been absolutely, solid, and against the run, very, very solid. Not elite on either, but just very good on both. The Notre Dame passing attack has been horrible this season. The rushing attack has been very strong, but a lot of those numbers were racked up against Purdue, who, I ran for 321 against Purdue last time I played them. The thing is that, the Notre Dame defense also very, very strong. I think this is going to be a lower scoring game than people think, but I think the Louisville offense has enough to keep it close. If a MAC team can keep it close and cover, if 2 MAC teams can cover against Notre Dame, I sure think Louisville can.
Yeah, I'm on the same boat. I'm going to take the under, and I'm going to take Louisville here. I have this one 24-20 either way. I think this is going to be a game where, Notre Dame's going to want to run the football, but you're going up against a Louisville defense that's still top 30 in rush defense, top 15 in yards per carry allowed. I get it. Level of competition has to be brought into the equation, but I think you could say the same for Notre Dame here. Yeah, they've had some impressive performances, but, Purdue and Texas A&M, 2 teams I'm not all that high on this season, and you didn't cover against either of the MAC teams that you played at home as well. And one of those was obviously the loss outright to Northern Illinois. So I'm going to take Louisville in the points in this one. I think this one's going to be a black and blue type matchup. I think it's going to be close. I think Louisville has a shot to win it outright.
Next up, we head to the Coliseum in LA, one of those words that I have trouble saying, and Coliseum, it's kind of like museum. I struggle with both those words. But the thing is, it's the home of the USC Trojans as they host Wisconsin in a Big Ten battle. It's just so odd to see USC playing against these teams because these are more Rose Bowl type matchups, historically. But what they are here is just a regular season game between 2 one-loss teams. We saw Wisconsin last 2 weeks ago against Alabama, just absolutely beaten down by the Tide in that game. It was a wear-down beatdown. They had no answer for Jalen Milroe and his running of the football. They played some solid defense, and I think Fickle, can coach defense, but he's really struggling at Wisconsin. Meanwhile, USC, we saw them give it up late against Michigan in a game that they kind of battled late to get it. But the defense has been a lot better than what we've seen in the past. And, of course, against this Wisconsin offense, which is pretty inept, 96th in the nation in yards per game. USC defense actually has the edge. And then offensively, just way too many athletes. We saw Luke Fickell coach at Ohio State as the interim coach when Jim Tressel was suspended. He looks a lot like that coach here at Wisconsin as opposed to the coach that we saw at Cincinnati. I think he looks like it again. I'm going to take Lincoln Riley's Trojans and lay the big number. I think, once again, a one-sided Wisconsin loss as the natives get restless in Madison.
Yeah, I'm going to take the under here, under 50.5. I think that Wisconsin's going to try to make this, sort of a run-heavy approach, especially now that, Tyler Van Dyke's out for the season. So now you're on to backup Braden Locke at quarterback. I know they've had a bye week to sort of get him prepared they had a bye week to get him prepared. But for me, I still think that they're going to struggle in this game because USC's defense, like you mentioned, Mitch, has improved under DeAnton Lynn. But I also think that that's going to take a few possessions away from USC. Even if USC covers this one, I still think it comes in under the number. I'm taking the under 50.5.
Yeah, I can get there with the under in this one. And normally I like backup quarterbacks, but this is just one of the situations I don't love Wisconsin in this game. Both of these teams have played tough opponents, but I do think USC is much more battle tested as they played a neutral site game against LSU, and then we're on the road last week, of course, against Michigan. While Wisconsin, this is their first true road game of the season. I just think that USC is better on both sides of the ball, especially offensively. I mean, Wisconsin they were struggling with Van Dyke at quarterback. Now the backup, they haven't really been able to run the football too consistently either. I just think USC wins this game in blowout fashion.
Next up, we head to College Station, where the Texas A&M Aggies take on Arkansas. We see College Station, we see this, Texas A&M Stadium on TV. It always looks like this rowdy, tough building, but the Aggies are certainly far from unbeatable in this stadium. That's the crazy thing about it. Chris, do the Hogs continue their improvement that we've seen from this team this season?
I definitely think they can. I like Arkansas at the points. I like Arkansas money line in this one. I'm with you. I just don't see the allure as much anymore of the imposing nature of College Station. I like what Taylor Green has brought to this Arkansas offense. They're top 10 in yards in total offense, top 20 in rushing the football. The team is just outside the top 25 in pass offense. You could easily make the case had they not shot themselves in the foot against Oklahoma State. They could easily be 2-0 straight up on the road this season with a double-digit underdog outright victory. I'm just not there with Texas A&M. I like the value, like I said, with Arkansas on the points and on the money line.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Arkansas is battle tested. They've already played 2 road games against Power 4 teams. Their offense has been excellent. They run the ball better than most teams. I mean, 5.5 yards per carry. Quarterback play's been there, and the defense, I think, has improved slightly. I mean, last week they gave up 400 yards to Auburn, but only 14 points. They have the ability to make big plays defensively. They had, they're +3 in turnover battle last week. So I just think getting more than a field goal, definitely some value with Arkansas in this game.
Mike Elko, spent the last few years at Duke at a program that really didn't have a lot of expectations. So anything that he did there to the positive certainly moved the needle. And of course, getting it done in some of those primetime games really helped move the needle and helped his reputation. But here in College Station, Aggie land, certainly the expectations are higher because one thing we know about Texas A&M, while they haven't had a lot of success in recent years, these guys open up the purse strings, man, to pay to get the very best of the best, and they felt they were doing that with Elko, who was a Texas A&M guy. I think coming up short in their opener, I think was really a bad thing for this program. I understand that they've come on since then and they've played some solid football since that Notre Dame game. But look who it's been against: Bowling Green, a subpar Florida team, and McNeese State. Arkansas, battle-tested team coming off the win at Auburn, winners over UAB. Didn't cover in that game, but also the loss against Oklahoma State, I think that was a good learning experience for them in that one. I think it carries over here. I'm taking the Hogs. We'll pick Suey. Next up, we head to the bounce house as the Central Florida Knights host the Colorado Buffalo. Colorado with a dramatic win last week and something to build on as a program. They had a program building win a year ago. They were able to ride that to a non-bowl year performance. Ron, Colorado looking like another non-bowl team after a big statement win.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, both teams coming off close wins. But I do think that UCF benefits from the bye week. And I just think that this is a great matchup for UCF and what they like to do, and that's run the football. I mean, they have some of the best running backs in college football. And we know that Colorado has really struggled on both sides of the ball when it comes to rushing. I mean, they only run for 2.6 yards per carry, and opposing teams have been able to run the ball very well against them like Nebraska did. So I just think UCF is just too much. I think it's just a bad matchup for Colorado. We've definitely seen the improvements in their game. I mean, that was a big win against Baylor, a win that they probably wouldn't have got last year. But I just think that on the road, in the bounce house, which is an underrated place to play, by the way, UCF is too much. So I'm going to lay the points with the Knights.
UCF running the football to the tune of over 375 yards a game against a Colorado team that has really struggled in the trenches. They did get that win against Baylor, but boy, it was, I guess a win is a win, and you can't really criticize that. But you can criticize some of the decisions that were made throughout the game, like going for it on 4th and 6 from your own 40 in the tie ball game. You can make the decision to basically hang Shedeur Sanders out to dry on a regular basis in that game, as he was pretty much either running for his life, running backwards, or getting sacked the bulk of the time. There's only so many times you can go to the well in Travis Hunter as an offensive player, and I think the better teams that you face, the less of an option that's going to become. And UCF has plenty of athletes on this team. I think they win it easy.
Yeah, I'm going to take UCF as well. Colorado, 8 straight losses as a double-digit underdog, or excuse me, as an underdog, and the majority of those by double digits, especially on the road. They've been getting crushed. They got crushed by Nebraska earlier this year, and even if you go back to last year, games like Oregon, Washington State, they were just getting beat up on the road. And like Ron said, this is what UCF wants to do. Run the football. They have the best rushing offense in the country against a Colorado defense that's 83rd against the rush. I think this is just one of those games where UCF's going to have a bunch of runs that are over 50 yards in this game and just chunk run plays. I think Colorado can be competitive, early on, but I think just over the course of the game, UCF's going to wear them down and get the winning cover on the road here. I'm going to take UCF.
College basketball season comes early as we head to Tobacco Road, and Duke hosts North Carolina. And, the first of several meetings this year. But, of course, the ones we really care about will happen on the college hardwood in just a couple of months. Of course, Duke, Elko gone to Texas A&M, North Carolina, Mac Brown. I believe he's one of the oldest coaches in all of college football, if not the oldest at this point. But the thing is Mac Brown, he does have one national title to his name, but that was a while ago at Texas. Duke, supposedly a team rebuilding, but actually they look not too bad this season. I think a lot better than people expected. 4-0 on the season to start. Of course, they haven't really been tested all that much, but they did get the win over Northwestern. Meanwhile, North Carolina, that loss against James Madison, absolutely pasted, allowing 70 points in that game. And I think they might be in some trouble here. I believe that North Carolina can run the football. They have one of the better rushing attacks out there and one of the best running backs in all of college football. But at the same time, I just think Duke's pass defense and I think Duke's ability to pass the football and put some points on the board as well. I just don't think you can live and die by the track meet anymore. And I think that if it does become that, I like the home team's chances. I'm going to take Duke.
Yeah, I'm going to take Duke as well. I think that North Carolina really, just got their teeth kicked in against JMU. JMU didn't have a drive that was over 10 plays in that game. There were just a lot of big plays broken off. And I think this Duke offense could do more of the same here. Malik Murphy has looked solid in his action so far. I don't like the quarterback situation for North Carolina. And I think Duke's defense is going to be the difference here. So I'm going to take Duke. I'm going to lay the 2.5 in this one.
Yeah, for me, this is a game between one of the best offenses in college football and one of the best defenses in college football right now. I know Duke's offense, in terms of points per game, has been okay at 31 points per game, but you got to look at their strength of schedule and the yards that they put up in those games. Doesn't look too great after that. And I think with Duke, usually this is a team that has a nice special teams advantage over their opponent, but North Carolina has one of the best special teams units in the country. So for me, I just think North Carolina coming off that ugly loss, I think we see a much better effort from them in this game defensively. Their offense is still very elite, and I think that we're getting a great price with North Carolina in this game, in my opinion. I'm going to go with the Tar Heels in this one on the road.
Next up, we head to Austin, where the Texas Longhorns take on Mississippi State. It is a bad year for Mississippi State, just not quite the same team that we've seen in the past. And the Texas Longhorns, well, they love to dress it up and beat up on the bad teams. At least that is the image that they've given out recently. Of course, they've beaten up on some good teams along the way, but we're not exactly sure what this team is because they haven't played against the toughest of tough teams just yet. Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I got to go with the over here. I think laying 38.5 is justified with Texas, but I think you're also asking potentially for a backdoor cover in that one, especially if you're laying the hook on the 38. I think I'd rather just take the over here because I think Mississippi State will be able to get some points in this one, but I think this could be another game where Texas could eclipse 50. For me, this is just going to be a high-scoring game, even if it's a one-sided one. I like the over 61.5 in this one.
I'm taking the points with Mississippi State. It's been ugly, no doubt about it, and Texas had a great start to the year. But you got Mississippi State 1-3 against the number, Texas 4-0. The Longhorns are overvalued, in my opinion. I mean, this is still their first conference game of the season, laying more than 35 points. I just can't get there with Texas at this number. I think they win the game comfortably. But Mississippi State's offense is good enough to put up a couple of touchdowns to cover the spread.
For me, I just think that, I'm not a huge fan of Sarkisian. I'm not a big fan of the Horns, but I just think Mississippi State just is this bad. They could be the worst team in the SEC this year, and I think that I expect Texas to really put on some points. I like the first half over as well, team total for Texas as well as Texas and Texas first half. I just think all those things come into fruition. Well, one thing we haven't really seen from the Horns is them take their foot off the gas, and be interesting to see if they do that here. Next up, we head to East Lansing, where the Michigan State Spartans, kind of a comeback program this year, taking on Ohio State. First game away from the horseshoe and first game against a power conference team at all this season. I mean, they have really had a cream puff schedules. Ron, Michigan State just another cream puff, or you think Sparty stands up?
I think this is another case, too many points. I mean, like you mentioned, Akron, Western Michigan, and Marshall, now you go on the road for the first time against a Big Ten team. I mean, Michigan State, definitely not as many expectations as this program is used to, but I think they've been more competitive than what a lot of people expected, and they played a pretty tough game against Boston College. They're much more battle-tested, in my opinion, and I think that they cover the spread. I think their defense is good enough. I don't think their offense does much of anything, but I mean, listen, Marshall put up 14 points against Ohio State. I think Marshall's one of the weaker teams in his conference this year. I think the Spartans can put up 17 plus themselves.
Michigan State has played the way tougher schedule. That game on the road against a good Boston College team. They also played Maryland to start the season. So I would say Maryland and Boston College could both wipe the floor with all three Ohio State opponents that they played. And I think Ohio State's numbers are greatly overstated here. This Michigan State run defense is really, really good. We saw them shut down Boston College 3 times inside the 5. And I think, if it wasn't for, a late blunder in the pass coverage, they could have won that game outright. I think Michigan State is a very live dog in this game to win the game outright. I love them with the points in this spot.
Yeah, I'm going to take the over once again here. I just think I have this game getting up into the 50s, even if whether it's an Ohio State blowout or if Michigan State makes this one fairly competitive. I just think that, 49.5 is just too low, because even with the cupcake schedule, I still think Ohio State's offense can do some damage here against Michigan State. But, we've seen Michigan State put up 27 against Maryland. They, like you guys said, they were competitive against Boston College. And they still have, a decent offense that can at least move the football a little bit, in the top half of the country in yards per play. So give me the over 49.5 in this one.
Next, we head to the feature game of the day. We head to Tuscaloosa, to Bryant-Denny Stadium, where the earth will move as Alabama hosts Georgia in a battle of top-ranked teams and two teams that have pretty much been on top of the college football world for about the past 6 or 7 years at this point. Of course, Georgia, a nice trophy case full of hardware. Alabama, traditionally a nice trophy case full of hardware, but it is DeBoer's first big game in the SEC as the coach of the Crimson Tide. And, of course, he's home and the pressure will be on. Ron?
Yeah, I think a lot of people look at that game for Georgia against Kentucky and kind of get a little bit worried about this spot now at Alabama, but not me. I just think that when you look at Alabama's performance against USF and then you look at what Miami did against USF, it's a bit concerning to see Alabama only have 393 total yards of offense against a Bulls defense that we saw got exposed last week. I mean, they really struggled against Miami. I think Georgia is going to be much, much better offensively in this game than it was at Kentucky. The bye week's even more helpful, in my opinion. And we know Georgia's elite defensively. Both teams are strong defensively, but I think Georgia is the better team. And because of that lackluster performance, we get an excellent price with the Bulldogs. This is a revenge game. Alabama was the loss that kept Georgia out of the playoff last year. I think they get the revenge, and I think they get the win and the cover.
I'm with Ron on this one. I think Georgia is the better team on both sides of the ball. I think Kirby Smart is the better coach, and I do believe he comes up with a defensive game plan that keeps Milroe in place there and says, you know what, you can try and beat us from the pocket. And I say if Alabama's going to have to do that, good luck to them because it's not going to happen. Georgia has a great secondary. And now we're starting to see some of these transfers like Young and Etienne get involved more in the game plan as well. And I expect to see Georgia to be the much better team on Saturday.
Yeah, I'm going to take Georgia as well. Like Ron said, that USF game was concerning, especially since it was a 14-13 game in the fourth quarter between those two. And, I think that you guys have all mentioned it, the revenge spot for Georgia here. The fact that Georgia's getting healthy, they're getting Michael Williams back here. He hasn't played since the Clemson game. And that win for Georgia over Clemson, given what Clemson has done the last couple weeks, is starting to look more impressive. So, for me, it's a spot where I just think Georgia gets it done, gets their revenge. I'm with you guys. I'm taking Georgia in this one.
Next up, we head to Happy Valley where Penn State takes on Illinois. Illinois, a little bit of an upside surprise this season so far. Meanwhile, Penn State, we're not really sure what exactly they're made of. We've seen them struggle at times and other times look like the Penn State that many thought they were going to be. I think Penn State's heavy lifting is still in front of them. So interesting to see how it will be. But we do have a battle of Big Ten unbeatens here. Illinois, their offense is not good. I mean, bottom half in every offensive category. Not, bottom of the barrel, but certainly not, upper half. And then defensively, pretty good, upper third, upper quarter in most defensive categories, especially defending the run. Penn State, their passing game, not quite as good as the running game. So it's basically strength on strength, weakness on weakness. But the Penn State defense has been a strength any way that you slice it. I think when we're looking at this number, though, it just to me looks a tad to the high side. I think Illinois once again surprises some people. I'll take the points with the Illini.
Yeah, I'm leaning towards the points with the Illini as well, but this number for me feels pretty close to dead on. I think Illinois' defense is going to be able to hold up here. It's going to be definitely for me, the toughest defense that the Nittany Lions will have faced so far, especially after beating up on Kent State last week. But Illinois, they went on the road. They took care of business against Nebraska. And while it is a step up here as well, I still think that, like I said, 17.5 just feels like a bit too many. Have this one around 14 to 17 points. So I'm going to take Illinois in the points in this one.
Yeah, I mean, Brett Bielema has done a great job with his team this season. 4-0 start, 3-0-1 against the number. But I just don't think their offense makes enough plays in this game to keep up for 4 quarters. And this is also a pretty clear letdown spot for the Illini after that overtime win against Nebraska on the road. Second straight road game in conference play. It's just not a great situation or spot for the Illini. So give me Penn State in this one. I'll lay the points.
Next up, we head to Utah, where the Utes return home to take on Arizona. Arizona's had a little bit of time off since that game at Kansas State, where they really ended up on the wrong side of things, kind of got caught on a Kansas State team that was rolling downhill. Meanwhile, Utah, just an absolute defensive scheme of the century last week against Oklahoma State. Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I'm going to lay the points here with Utah. It is a big number, and I am still high on this Arizona team. But if we've seen nothing else in the last couple of years, actually in the last little while, it's that Rice-Eccles is a place where, opposing teams just go to fall flat. I mean, it's arguably one of the toughest road environments in college football. Like you said, we've seen Utah just execute defensive masterclass time and again. And I think they're going to be able to hold down this Arizona offense. And Utah, I think they're going to be able to do some damage here. Whether or not Cam Rising ends up playing, we kind of played this will he or won't he game all season last year. I'm not concerned with it. I think that Utah gets the job done in this one. I'm going to lay the points with the Utes here.
I agree with Chris that I think Arizona, I think we're going to get value backing them at some point this season. I just don't think this is the game or the matchup just because what Utah looks to do. I mean, they have such a strong offensive and defensive line. They run the football well. They have one of the best run defenses and defenses in general in college football. And that was an issue for Arizona last game against Kansas State. Their offensive line, not only did they have a ton of holding calls and false starts, but they couldn't run the football and they were too one-dimensional offensively. So while you have a great, quarterback and one of the best receivers in college football, if you can't run the football on the road, it's going to be a long day. This is a revenge game for Utah, who got blown out against Arizona last year. The home team is 4-1 against the number in the last 5. Just too many things pointing in the direction of the Utes for me.
I like Utah as well. I like the way that they're playing this season. Utah, not anything, they're not going to be anything overly exciting. And I think the thing about Utah that we're at this point is that, while they continue to wait for Cam Rising, I think, Utah as a team has stopped waiting for Cam Rising. And we saw Wilson play very effectively last week. And I think it was really surprising, a different wrinkle. As teams prepare for Rising, you have a guy that actually has some good wheels underneath him. And man, he just creates a lot of plays out there. I just think that the Utah defense, they were fearless against Oklahoma State, basically just, sending the house, man, repeatedly against the Cowboys, just saying, you know what, we dare you to try and complete one against us with, rushing this many guys. I think they continue to do that. I think they beat Arizona pretty good in this one. Next up, we go to the Pac-10 and we close it out as UCLA takes on Oregon. It is a Big Ten battle of Pac-12 teams. Ron, I don't know what more we could even say about it, but UCLA actually looked a little bit better than people expected last week against LSU.
Yeah, got to give them credit for the cover, but they still didn't get a sniff of a win in that game. And I still think that we've mentioned the last couple of weeks, I've said, big coaching mismatch. This could be the biggest one of the season. I just think that Oregon has the advantage on all facets of this game. And, it's a rivalry game. It's not easy to lay this many points in games like these, but I just think Oregon's too much, like we saw against the Beavers a couple of weeks ago. Coming off the bye now, I just think it's a great spot for the Ducks to get a blowout win, a signature win.
Yeah, for me, I think the Ducks, have not – they looked good in the second half against Oregon State, but I think overall Dylan Gabriel, one of the more overrated players in college football this season. I think that, UCLA is probably going to be a work in progress. They appear to at least be making some progress, but I don't know if it's enough progress in this one. I'm going to roll with the Ducks at home. I just are on the road. I think they're just too much here for the Bruins at the Rose Bowl.
Yeah, I went back and forth on this one, but I think in the end I have to settle with Oregon as well. It was on LSU. I was on UCLA last week against LSU. I just thought it was too many points. This is a big number as well for Oregon, for an Oregon team that early on this season was making games a lot closer than they probably should have been. And you would think that maybe that could be the same here, but I think that Oregon waking up in the rivalry game against Oregon State before the bye week, I think it's a sign of things to come for Oregon. I think they're going to start to turn the corner here. UCLA, I just don't think has enough to hang for a full 4 quarters here. And I think Oregon pulls away in the second half. So I'm going to take Oregon. I'm going to lay the big number.
Well, that wraps up another week of college football action. Of course, we'll be back for next week, week 6 in October college football as the leaves start to turn and as does the schedule. Doesn't look to be the sexiest schedule of the year, but you never know what's going to happen. Games like that Clemson-Florida State game, certainly not going to be as big of a game as it looked to initially be on the schedule, but who knows? Maybe the Noles rise to the occasion. Some of the other ones out there, you never know, and that's why they play the games. Chris, anything else you'd like to add before we go?
I'm just ready to start betting on Iowa overs when they come back next week against Ohio State. And like you said, that Clemson Florida State game I'm looking forward to, as I am Missouri Texas A&M. So a lot of games I'm looking forward to next week.
Yep, we got a great card this week and next week as well. And thanks for joining us, and hopefully make some money this week.
Yep. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. We will see you next week. Let's cash in. Let's bust up the books on my favorite day of the week during my favorite time of the year, College Football Saturday.